So the latest GeForce Driver released by Nvidia last week gives almost all 10 series video card, 1060 and up, the ability to run ray tracing on ray tracing enabled video game. And that's rather a surprising move, knowing that ray tracing has been this huge thing, the driving force and the big argument of selling the new RTX family of video cards, the new 20 series. I mean, that alone motivated a huge branding change, which is 10 years old, the GTX to the RTX family of video cards. So why would Nvidia do such a thing? But first, for the ones who do not know what ray tracing is, this technology has been widely used and adopted in the animation industry, giving lifelike qualities to light treatment and reflection. I mean, it really is spectacular, but its adoption on the gaming world is rather bumpy, both on the user and the developer side. Starting with the user, when the RTX video card, the 20 series, has been released by Nvidia, the first thing which shocked everyone was its pricing. It's about 30 to 50% more expensive than what we've been used to for the past decades. Usually Nvidia has been very good in keeping the same or almost the same launching price for all its different series every 2 years or so, but the 20 series has been particularly expensive. But also the performances of these new cards, if you take away the ray tracing argument, are very similar to the 10 series on non-ray tracing video games. And on the developer side, well, at launch date, we had no ray tracing video game out there. I mean, shortly a month or two after its actual release, we had two video games, namely Battlefield 5 and Tomb Raider, which were using ray tracing. And 6-7 months later, we only have 3 in total, adding Metro Exodus, which was just released a couple of weeks ago. And, they're not rushing. Developers and animations and gaming studios are not rushing to rewrite their 3D engines and API software to use ray tracing. And that is indeed very problematic for Nvidia. If there's no ray tracing games out there, and there's simply not enough incentive to upgrade. So Nvidia's solution to this nearly catastrophic scenario is to broaden and have a wider ray tracing support community by enabling the 10 series card, which is by far much more common than its 20 series video card. And it would make sense. I mean, having a more ray tracing enabled hardware out there is a better or stronger incentive for the gaming studios to develop more games and checkmark this technology and the old direction that Nvidia has chosen to go with the ray tracing technology. Or I've said technology maybe 8 times into sentences, but you do get what I mean. And if you're interested to know more about how Nvidia activated ray tracing on video cards which do not have RT cores, you should go on my website laurentschoice.com and read the full article I have made on the topic. But of course, I am sure you can see the potential problems that this move entails for Nvidia, and namely, why would you upgrade to a very expensive 20 series if your 10 series can handle ray tracing video games? Well, don't worry too much about this, because ray tracing on a GTX on the 10 series absolutely suck. I have taken the only 3 games in existence which can handle ray tracing, namely Battlefield 5, The Shadow of Tomb Raider, and the very, very recent Metro Exodus. And keep in mind that they do not have all the same level of ray tracing in their engine, going from the lighter version of Battlefield 5 all the way to the global illumination ray tracing engine of Metro Exodus. And I have decided to conduct all the tests on 1K, 2K, 4K on an RTX 2080 Ti, an RTX 2080 and the GTX 1080 Ti. And I was going to include the 1080, 1070 Ti and the 1070 in my test, but as I was benchmarking the GTX 1080 Ti, I have decided not to. As I said earlier, Battlefield 5 is the game with the least amount of ray tracing, and therefore the one which showed best performances with ray tracing on. It manages to stay in an RTX 2080 performance neighborhood in 1K, but is completely distanced by the 2080 in 2K, despite being somewhat playable. And in almost 4K, it's not sustainable for an FPS, especially when you're playing against people which are going at 100 frames per second. As for the Shadow of Tomb Raider, in 1K it's playable, but far from the RTX 2080 performances. But as soon as you go to 2K, bets are off. You can see a real slowdown on the game with frame rate dips going in the low 20s. In 4K, it's a disaster. I mean, this is choppy, it barely moves, and you have dips all the way down to 14 and 13 frames per second. So forget about the 1080 Ti in those kind of resolutions. And finally, the only game using ray tracing global illumination, without any surprise, Metro Exodus was not the GTX best day. In 1K, we're barely having 30 FPS with dips below 25. In 2K, I mean, come on, 20 to 25 with dips at 15, and in 4K, 13 frames per second at best, with dips of 5. Put ray tracing off and you jump right back at 100 frames per second, happily running through your non-ray tracing map. So yes, in light of those numbers, why would I go on a 1080, let alone a 1070 Ti? The only way you can use ray tracing on a GTX is on a 1080 Ti on games which do not use too much ray tracing. So is it simply a bad implementation of the technology? Not so sure about this. I think it's not only about let's get a wider hardware support for ray tracing thing. I think that it's much more cynical than this. I believe that Nvidia wanted to make a bitter point. You know, when they released the RT cores and the Tensor cores on their new RTX lineup of video cards, critics, including truly yours, pointed that maybe these were not ready for the gaming community and they were not so impactful onto the performances of the games. And I think that by enabling ray tracing on cards without those two new family of cores on GTX cards showed how important those cores are to ray tracing. Without them, it's barely playable, if playable at all. And it's a work in progress. I mean, Battlefield 5 went through a dozen of multi-gigabyte updates in the past 5 months just to double the frame rate on ray tracing enabled gaming and to introduce a DLSS engine. But this does not change a thing. If they don't revise their pricing down, if they don't make it more compatible to the gaming budget community, then ray tracing will just die. It's gonna go. And I think that AMD right here has a huge card to play in their next generation of video card in making budget ray tracing something of a reality. And that, I guess, is the conclusion of my short video, of my short update today. There is no technological problem with ray tracing. I think that it's now mature enough to play on our games, and the only thing which will push studios to produce and release more ray tracing enabled games is simply having more guys buying ray tracing cards. And that means, yes, Nvidia, if you're watching this, slash your prices fast. You cannot expect people to spend $1,400 on a 2080 Ti, or you need to bring it down to what the 1080 Ti used to be at launch, $800 without taxes. Same for 2080. I should be able to buy one of those at about $450. That's what the market expects, that's what I expect, and that's what the gaming community deserves. if it's not for us, at least do it for ray tracing. If it's so dear to your heart, make it for ray tracing. Yeah.